Tohle je Crunch, já jsem Čestmír Strakatý a mým dnešním hostem je Bjarke Ingels, architekt, zakladatel studia Bjarke Ingels Klub, autor Vltavské filharmonie, respektive toho, jak by měla vypadat Vltavská filharmonie. Tento rozhovor bude veden v angličtině, jeho podobu z titulky můžete najít na webu checkcrunch.cz a na YouTube, v audiu je pouze v angličtině. Welcome, Mr. Ingels. Thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
What do you appreciate about the Czech Republic as an architect?
Obviously Prague is a very beautiful city, and actually one of the so not only do you have an incredibly rich architectural history, and I think Prague as a city sort of shaped by the river and the kind of steep, at least by Danish standards,
yes.
steep hills.
Yes.
The kind of Prague castle feels like this sort of almost like a fantasy city where you have these winding streets that capture, like very intimately proportioned, capture spectacular views. So this kind of coexistence of a dramatic landscape and an urban scenery.
You know, part of that dramatic landscape and urban scenery is the Vltava Philharmonic Hall, which is something you will hopefully construct or according to your plans. Because of what you said, what you like about this city, does it hold a special significance for you that you actually were so successful in the competition?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Just a little anecdote. When I started my company, Big. Actually, one of the first exhibition we did about our work outside Denmark was in Prague.
Oh, really?
I think I could mispronounce it, like the Fragner Gallery.
Yeah.
And
not so bad.
And it was actually one of my friends and colleagues, one of my associates, Jan Magazanik, was employee number 1 or 2 in the new company. And I think one of the first competitions we did once we became big, Bjarke Ingels Group, was for the National Library of Czech Republic.
Yeah.
So we came here on a trip to understand the site. It was on top of the hill in a park.
And it never happened.
It never happened, sadly. Also, we definitely did not win it either. But during that visit, Jan was not working with us yet. He was just an architect from Prague who had written us and said if we wanted to do the competition, he would happily show us Prague. And eventually he moved to Copenhagen, and his daughter now speaks Danish. But then we ended up having it was actually the first article written about me outside Denmark, which was we had lunch at a restaurant, and it was kind of in the late summer, and I kept being attacked by a wasp.
Yeah,
and I ended up getting stung, and I'm allergic to wasps, and I didn't have my shot on me, so Jan had to call the ambulance. And then he had to explain the name of the restaurant, and it was like Niestu Vozni, I think, right? so like the hornet's nest, and like of course the people at the hospital thought it was a goddamn joke, right? Ambulance came, I got saved. I'm still here. But then the next day there was a write up in the newspaper saying that Danish architect gets stung by bee in hornet's nest. So that's my claim to fame. But essentially, when actually 2 years before we did the competition for the Vltava Philharmonic, I'm turning 50 this year, so I had written a little bucket list.
Okay.
Of things I wanted to build before I die, right? And top of the list was a Philharmonic concert hall.
Okay.
So
it's a dream come true.
It's absolutely a dream come true, and I think this the project. So I went again for the site visit. This time, no wasps, and of course the site was a little bit I don't want to say disappointing, but because it is on the river, it's looking across an island. You can see the Prague castle from the side.
Well, you've called the site a bleeding wound.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like an open wound
that is what
infrastructure.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. And so in that sense, but it's also nice when there are some problems to solve, because then you know.
And there are many problems.
And there's a few problems on this site. But also we got to, when we walked under the tunnel, there was like the skateboarders were of course there and have created a little heaven. And then at least it's also a very well-connected site. It has 2 bridges. It has a train line, a tram line. It has the highway. So it has, so it's, and it's also going to be the beginning of a whole new neighborhood in the city, right? So I think it would have been maybe even more scary if it was right next to the Prague castle, because then you can really create some damage. Whereas here, we could actually create some solutions.
You could save the place.
Yeah, potentially, yes. Yeah.
Well, you've said before in one of your talks I've listened to that architects or designers give form to the future, shape the future. But here it's actually happening, because you kind of shape the future of this part of town, definitely. Maybe the whole town, kind of. But this part of town, definitely. Do you actually think about it this way? Like really shaping the future of like third of Prague, maybe?
No, but I think actually that is, in a way, what I think is the true power of architecture is, and of course with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Or like I read the other day, with great power comes a big energy bill. But of course for this site, we in a way had to invite ourselves to imagine how would we love to find this place once the Philharmonic was finished, right? And I think what we try to give this place, because this is one of the more flat parts of Prague.
Yeah.
We try to, in a way, create this, that the Philharmonic would not be just an institution for the people who already have an interest in Philharmonic music. But it could also be a truly public building. So if you're just a kid growing up in that neighborhood, or someone visiting, or like, and you pass by, you will find yourself invited to enter and explore. In this case, to climb the canopies that also become terraces. And in a way, you can say the Philharmonic Concert Hall almost becomes what Prague Castle is, like a hybrid between public space and architecture, and really literally connects all the way down to the river and rises all the way to the roof.
So you've actually played with the idea of like a transit hub, like what it is now, but different and for different reasons, and hopefully more beautiful, but kind of the same.
No, yeah, exactly. You can say it's trying to take all the flows that are already there and orchestrate them in a way that creates some kind of a harmony or destination.
Well, you mentioned National Library, which again never happened because of how controversial that plan was. Aren't you afraid that it's gonna end up the same? It's your dream, kind of bucket list, one of those. Aren't you afraid that the next political the next mayor or whoever is gonna be in charge in 5 years is gonna say, this is too expensive, we don't want it, we don't need it, we're gonna go a different way?
I mean, of course, in architecture, I've learned that you should never celebrate too soon, right?
Yeah.
And it is a complex site. It's a very public project, and I think, in essence, architecture is public art.
Yeah.
The buildings sit outdoors in the middle of the public space, and once you put them forward, everybody has an opinion about them, and your interpretation is as good as mine, but maybe with the added fact that you're actually a citizen of Prague, and I'm not. So in that sense, the architecture has to be capable of incorporating this feedback. And actually, we've been working on it for the for the last many months, and we're just about to submit what we call schematic design. Mm-hmm. So in a way, we've taken everything from the competition, taken all the feedback from the city, from Prague 7, from the heads of the orchestras, and in a way now have something that, in my humble opinion, is even better than the competition. But more importantly, it's more real, because now it has incorporated much more specific feedback. And
so, how did it change?
I think when that after I say goodbye to you, I'll be presenting it at camp.
Yeah,
and I think people may not even notice that anything has changed.
Details,
but we've put a lot of energy into defining the various concert halls, so they have more architectural definition. We know a lot more about the areas and what it costs. Like, one of the things that we were asked to create is also, in addition to the fact that the architecture of design actually allows you to walk on the building along the facades. You can, if you're a music student, you can actually walk up to the musical classrooms without entering on the ground floor. Mm-hmm. You can walk on the outside building. There's restaurants, both a kind of fine dining restaurant and a kind of more public restaurant on the top with views over the river and the city. There's the client wanted to be able to get to the roof right away, so we've actually snug a series of escalators into the foyer. So when you enter the foyer, you can sort of blitz all the way up to the roof.
Shortcut.
And then gravity will help you walk down after your lunch, right? So so in that sense, like little elements to, because when we proposed it, there was also an element of risk. Maybe the Philharmonic doesn't want people to walk on their roof, right?
Yeah.
But I think in this case, I think the city and the Philharmonic really sort of understands that this should be the most inviting building possible.
Well, actually, the Philharmonie is actually kind of a national institution. It's something that, one of the things that I think most people actually take as like a symbol, maybe something we actually take as our own. So maybe walking on the roof is actually good for it, that people actually can come really close.
And it's a very Prague thing, right?
Yeah.
No, and I think in that sense also, when you're inside the foyer, for instance, we've given a much more definition to the foyer, and the different levels of the foyer. Of course, the foyer has to access the balconies on different levels. From those balconies, you can also access out to the building. So in a break, you can sort of walk out, and you could even like go outside and come back in. So I think the kind of inside-outside is broken down in ways you rarely see. Like some concert halls can be very hermetic. Mm-hmm. This one is going to be very public. And then maybe the last thing we put a lot of energy into is fantasizing about the halls. Mm-hmm. And because in a way it is called the Vltavská Philharmonic. It's named after the river. One of the kind of national treasures of Czech symphonic music is the Vltava Symphony. Mm-hmm. That is a kind of musical interpretation of the journey of the water from the mountains through the Bohemian forest and into Prague. And in that sense, for the main hall, it's going to be entirely clad in wood. But when you look at old concert halls, a lot of the old concert halls, the reason they have a beautiful sound is actually all the ornamentation, the wood carvings. Yeah. They create a sound diffusion, which is like dispersing the sound is part of creating a kind of crisp sort of acoustic image. So in this case, we're proposing to cut the wood. So you have the kind of organic variations of the edge of the timber, where where you see evidence of the tree trunk. So when you see the wood, it actually has this kind of natural organic ornamentation, if you like, from the tree itself, which will give you this sound dispersal. And then for the second largest hall, for kind of chamber music, we're actually looking at Czech stone, the journey from the mountains.
Yeah.
And instead of cutting it like thin slices, we're looking at breaking it raw, like you do in the quarry.
Yeah.
So again, the texture, the broken texture of the raw cut stone creates this sound dispersal. So in a way, trying to do with natural elements what you normally get from historical ornamentation.
So is like you're talking about acoustic challenges that are ahead of you, or that you have to solve.
Yes.
Is this the reason why it was actually on the bucket list? Because it's very hard in the end.
I think that actually, I think the Philharmonic is also like I'm Danish, and Danish architecture's greatest monument is actually on the other side of Earth.
Yeah,
it's the Sydney Opera.
Yeah,
by Jørna Utzona, who's kind of a national hero in Denmark, and I always felt it would be amazing just once in your life if you could just get to do one Sydney Opera, then you could just die happy, right? And of course, I think this is an amazing opportunity. And then, as you suggest, a lot of things in architecture, what used to be solved by design, increasingly is solved by technology.
Yeah,
and the symphony hall is like almost like an instrument, a fine-tuned instrument, where the architecture, the material, the geometry not only determines the proximity of the viewers and their ability to see the orchestra, like sightlines, etc., but also the sound experience. So the architecture is really the final element of the orchestra, if you like.
That's a beautiful thought. Sometimes architecture and design actually polarizes people. For some, it's boring, mundane. For some, it's too bold, it's too extreme, too extravagant. And usually, it happened to National Library, actually, because it was too bold. How do you, as an architect, as a designer, as someone who wants to maybe push something ahead, come to this? And actually, you said you've taken feedback in, but people don't want it more bold, or do they?
No, I think what I experienced, and it's very true what you're saying, architecture can be very polarizing.
Yeah.
What we experienced after we announced the design in the spring last year was actually sort of more than ever like a majority of a very positive response. And I think, in a way, like I like this idea that as an architect, we get the opportunity to, in a way, visit and contribute to many different cities and cultures and climates. And I think the way we start is always in a way that you go to a place and you, in a way, try to fall in love with the place and the program, and I think in that sense, the kind of very three-dimensional drama of Prague, also because like in some ways you could say Prague, it's a kind of historical city. It has a kind of uniform height of 5-6 floors, and then a lot of historical spires that sort of escape the skyline. Quite similar to Copenhagen, actually, but Copenhagen is just completely flat. Also, Copenhagen is on both sides of a port, so it's not a river, but it is a kind of linear water element, and it kind of organizes the city. It has a series of bridges, not as many as Prague. So there's like similarities and differences, but the real difference is the three-dimensional drama of the topography. And I think in that sense, we didn't want, because if you, I mean, Kapličky is a kind of national hero in Czech Republic, the architect of the library, and the kind of founder of Future Systems was the name of his studio. His buildings had a kind of very object-like, sort of futuristic, almost alien quality, and as I remember it, the library in a kind of very popular description looked a little bit like a mixture between a ghost, like with a sheet over it, and an Emmentaler cheese, right?
We called it blob here.
No, yeah, exactly. So and I can see how that could trigger some some responses,
and then some.
And I think in a way, I think if you would,
did you actually have to? When coming here and falling in love with the place, did you have to accommodate for the more maybe conservative minds of the Prague people? Because maybe we didn't want this to be as bold as the National Library was, so you have to maybe tone it down. Maybe you didn't want to. I don't know.
No, I was like,
but if you wanted to win, maybe you had to.
Yeah, I mean, I would say. Like first of all, you know, I'm not Kapličky, so it's very rare that our buildings look like blobs. But I think, in my own humble opinion, it's pretty bold, the Prague Philharmonic, and I think as a work of architecture, I like the idea that our buildings look the way they do because they perform the way they do.
Yeah,
like in a way, it looks interesting because it does something interesting, and I think in this case the public invitation, and also we worked very much with this idea of the very large canopies that on one hand create shaded space that is protected from the rain. Like I think Prague is a lot warmer than Copenhagen, but you also have some weather.
Yeah.
And so it's, you know, shading from the rain, or like protecting from the rain, shading from the sun in the summer, but also creating this very generous ascension from the riverbank all the way to the roof. To do that with a public building, I think is pretty bold.
Well, you mentioned climate. We don't really know how it's going to look like in 20 or 30 years because of climate change and because of how everything works. There was some critique towards your design that it's not maybe sustainable enough. It doesn't take advantage of all the technology that it could take advantage in order to make it greener, so to speak. Is this something you took in as the part of the feedback as well?
No, it's definitely like the environmental performance of the building is definitely something we're taking very serious. And I would say, like in the coming phases, you can say the phase that we just went through now was very much about integrating the building into the infrastructural complexity of the existing site, and then also making sure that all the program sits where it does. Then, of course, we're working almost entirely with locally sourced materials, like local timber, local stone. So, like, we're trying in a way to take advantage of the craft and culture and the indigenous material palette you have in Czech Republic and Prague. And then, for instance, we're creating, like, it's a rather transparent building. And of course, if you have a lot of transparency, you can cook in the summer, because like glass is very well insulated today, or it can be very well insulated. So, ironically, it's not so much the cold in the winter as it is the
warmth,
the heat in the summer.
Yeah.
But that's why we have these very, very generous overhangs or canopies that provide natural shade, so they don't only protect the public realm from the sun and the rain, but they also protect the facades. So I think, and as we move along, we'll keep sort of refining and enhancing the environmental performance.
But this aspect of the whole thing, sustainability, is a big topic for you in all your endeavors and in all your plans, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Like the first building or like project we ever realized was the harbor bath in Copenhagen, because the port of Copenhagen had become so clean that you could swim in it. Yeah. And more than 2 decades ago, when we opened it, and you just suddenly saw all the Copenhageners running into the harbor, instead of driving for hours to get to the beaches, they could actually swim in the port in the middle of the city. And I thought, this is an incredible phenomenon. Maybe it's a bigger idea. And we ended up calling it hedonistic sustainability.
Yeah.
The idea that the sustainable city or the sustainable building not only is better for the environment, but it's also much more enjoyable, or can be much more enjoyable for the people that inhabit it. And I think that mindset, we've been trying to pursue it in different ways. Like one of our most recent projects in Copenhagen is a waste-to-energy power plant, the cleanest in the world. It's so clean that the steam that comes out of the chimney is actually cleaner than the air of Copenhagen. So we've been able to turn the facade into the tallest man-made climbing wall in the world. It's actually made by Walltopia, a Czech climbing wall manufacturer.
Okay.
And it's 100 meters tall. You need to be a very good climber. You look like you could climb,
no,
but
definitely not.
You may have to take a course or two before you start scaling that building. And then you can also take the elevator up inside and then ski down the roof.
Oh.
So it's like a man-made mountain. In a city that has no mountains, you have to do them yourself. But again, an attempt to solidify this idea that clean technology is not only better for the environment, it also creates completely new possibilities. Instead of being an eyesore that casts shadows on the neighbors and block the views, it becomes a scalable, climbable, skiable mountain.
You know, this hedonistic sustainability, this talk is actually very lively, sometimes even bloody, here in Prague, because there is a big, I guess you could call it a fight between people who want to use cars and people who want to use bicycles or pedestrians or public transport, actually changing the town from something that is very last century into something that is very this or maybe next century is something we are in actually right now. Maybe the Philharmonic is actually part of it, because it changes a big transport hub into something that is more public. So how does an ideal city look like for you in this regard? Do you understand this whole talk between cars, bikes?
Yeah, and I think I think the main answer is that the truth is cars became so popular because they're actually quite good for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But they're not necessary, and therefore there was a long period of time after the Second World War, like 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, where city planning was becoming basically designed for cars at the expense of everybody else. And I think you need a city needs to be a much more complex and diverse ecosystem of movement. And I think one of the things you see today that is making this possible is with connected technology. Most cities by now have a system of city bikes that you can unlock with your phone and take and leave somewhere else. And I think this idea of a much more multimodal way of moving around, sometimes it makes sense to take the car, especially if you're leaving the city and if you have to move stuff or if you have a lot of kids, But there's a lot of times where it makes no sense. And we actually made a project with Toyota, an experimental city called the Woven City at the base of Mount Fuji in Japan. And it's currently under construction, the first few phases. But what we ended up doing, and it was kind of interesting because our client was a car maker, but they were aware that things were changing. So they had to be a provider of urban mobility as a service or a system. So they wanted to have an experimentarium, a living, working laboratory where they could test different ways of moving around. And very quickly, I'll explain, like, we ended up analyzing that because we're trying to do everything with every street, everything is dominated by cars. So we said, what if we create a city grid where every third street is for autonomous electric vehicles and pedestrians, like a normal street. Every third street is more like a promenade for pedestrians, but also personal mobility like e-scooters and bikes. And then every third street is like a park only for pedestrians and, with trees. And then we do the same 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in both directions. So it becomes like a weave, hence the woven city. And it creates a city fabric where you can get from anywhere to anywhere by taking an autonomous electric vehicle. But you can also get from anywhere to anywhere by riding a bike through a promenade or by walking through a park. So if you live here, your kids, when they're old enough to walk on their own, they can just walk through. It's just like you're only allowed to walk in the park. And then you can get from your house to the school, staying only in the park.
Yeah. Well, the problem with this is a new site, a new town, a woven city. But here there are decades of planning for cars, and people are very used to it, and the infrastructure is actually made for it. So it's kind of hard to change. It's kind of hard to change people's minds, and it's hard to change the infrastructure as well. It's like almost like it needs a radical change either, or something has to happen because...
Yeah, but I think like it's just important to remember that actually, if you take like inner city Prague, is designed for pedestrians primarily, and then your occasional horse. No, I'm just saying like the way it was originally planned, right?
Yeah.
And then the sort of the kind of 19th century outskirts for horses, and then it's more when you come to the suburbs that the car finally existed, and then you have. But then, of course, like the cars have gotten more and more right of way inside the city itself. But originally, the spaces were actually not designed for cars. And then, secondly, I want to say that the principles of the woven city could actually easily be applied to a city like Prague by reinterpreting the streets that are there. And in fact, in Barcelona, they're working on a concept they called the mega manzana, the mega block. Where they try to take, if you know Barcelona, a big part of Barcelona is called Eixample, and it consists of these square blocks that are 100 by 100 meters. And they're looking at, and they've already done a few tests where they take 9 blocks, 3 by 3, and then they restrict the cars to the outside, and then they basically turn the streets that are in the middle into plazas and parks and playgrounds. And it's, of course, it creates a lot of discussion and a lot of opinions, but it works. So I think what we hope to do with the Woven City is to deliver a lot of experience, a lot of, like Toyota and their collaborators can test a lot of different initiatives within the city fabric. And if it proves successful, the principles could actually be applied to cities as diverse as Prague and Copenhagen and New York, for that matter.
Well, I'd be interested to see that and the lively discussion.
But probably not without discussions.
Yeah.
You might have to write a few podcasts on that subject.
Well, in the end, we are not as flat as Denmark is. So there is always going to be this problem, or at least according to the critics. So this is the Woven City is part of the master planet idea, right?
Yeah, like at least you can say it's very informed by some of the discoveries we did in now we call it Plan for Planet.
So what is simplicity?
It? No, it was actually in the beginning of COVID. In March 2020, we sent everybody home to work from home, except our model makers and like basically people who volunteered, because we found out that our model workshop. The 3D printers and the plexi sheets we used to make glass in the models could be used to make face shields and ventilator tubes, so more people could be on the same ventilator. And in the first 6 weeks, we ended up in our different offices making more than 25,000 of these artifacts and giving them to the local healthcare providers until the normal supply chain could catch up.
Yeah.
And we felt like in some way it was thought-provoking that almost by accident, some of the tools we had in our company could address one of the most urgent issues on the planet at the time, access to emergency medical equipment. So we started thinking, like, is there another problem? What is the biggest problem in a way we could address with our methodology as architects and planners? And we thought, what if, we make master plans for a site like the site of the Philharmonic. We make it for neighborhoods. We make it for cities, maybe sometimes for entire regions. What if we actually apply the methods and the tools of urban master plans to all of it, all of planet Earth? And then we started saying, because it was also because we were a little bit tired. Each time you start talking about sustainable development, and there's something called whataboutism. Yeah. That you can always say, yeah, but what about? And then it derails the conversation. And there's also a lot of people you keep hearing that someone has now made a new study that says if everybody should have the same quality of life as the EU, then we need like 20 Earths or whatever. Like in a way saying it's impossible. And then you also hear people saying, yeah, we need to invent fusion energy because otherwise we won't be able to power humanity. And we were just curious, is that really true? And if not, what is true? And then we sort of ended up making a plan for the planet. It has 5 verticals or sectors that relate to carbon emissions, climate change. But then it has another 5, and that's, like transportation, energy, industry, food production, like waste. But then it also has another 5 that are related to, that are necessary to solve if you want to have a sustainable human presence on Earth, but they're unrelated to climate change. And it could be like pollution, like particles in the air or plastics in the ocean, access to fresh water, human health, et cetera, et cetera. And then we started like quantifying the issues. We also asked ourselves, how much energy does the world consume in 1 year? And what when we are 10 billion instead of 8 billion, how much is that going to be? And if we all had the same quality of life as Denmark and Singapore has roughly the same life expectancy, health, and also energy consumption. So what if we should all be as nice as Denmark? And then of course the problem becomes a little bit bigger. And then we started trying to break it down, and maybe just one little example as a way to make it really tangible. Because I think one of the problems is that it's so complex that most people can't understand it. And even if you are a politician or a podcaster, you have a day job, and you probably have a busy day job. So should you then go home and start like doing serious research? Like what can you do? So we thought like we need to find a way to consolidate the issue into something that is faster to digest, so you can quickly sort of understand the problem. And we came up with the idea, what if we boil it down to one earthling? So if we're 10 billion earthlings on Earth, how much is there of Earth to sustain each earthling? And you're left with 238 meters by 238 meters in a square. And 71% of it, that's essentially your share in all of Earth, right? 71% of it is salt water, it's ocean basically, right? 9% of it is uninhabitable, mountains, glaciers, etc. And then roughly 1 hectare is habitable, and almost exactly half is nature, and half is mostly agriculture with a little bit of city. And that half hectare or like 1 acre is pretty much where all the problems come from. And then we started breaking down and seeing, okay, so in this remaining piece of land, how much of it is, different kinds of crops? And we found out some of the crops are only made to make palm oil or corn for making energy. But you can make the same amount of energy with photovoltaics much more efficiently. So we can take that off. And then we started like looking at it in very practical, tangible ways. And our conclusions were, and very simply also like some of the emissions come from the materials. So like a very simple idea is that if you take a building and when you make concrete, you burn lime and it releases chemically CO2 into the atmosphere. So if you change 1 ton of concrete or steel into 1 ton of wood in a building, you reduce the carbon footprint of the building with 2.2 tons of CO2. So there's like a lot of like simple hacks. It just so happens it's not all buildings that are very easy to make out of wood, but the ones you can, maybe you should. For instance, like we're doing the Zurich airport. It's going to be the biggest timber building on Earth, made with Swiss timber. But essentially, we started by, in a way, looking at the planetary scale. We started getting an understanding that we didn't have before. And like the 2 happy messages are, we can very simply actually sustain 10 billion people with the quality of life of Denmark with a smaller footprint than what we are using today. And we don't have to wait for new technologies to be invented. Of course, new technologies will only contribute positively, but using only solar and wind and batteries and hydrogen and known best practice systems of agriculture, we can actually sustain 10 billion people sustainably with the resources we have available. Is it going to be politically easy? Of course it's not going to be. This is going to be full of a lot of tension and discussions, absolutely. But just from first principles, it's nice to know that the problem is very solvable, and it's very solvable with what we have available today.
Well, it actually sounds like you solved climate change, kind of.
No, I mean, I think that the truth of climate change is it's an implementation problem, right? And it's and like in any venture investor in entrepreneurs will say, ideas are cheap. It's execution that makes the whole difference. But it's just nice to know. And we were thinking, and in that sense, I would say for myself and my organization and a lot of our collaborators, having that, and I'll be sharing some of the plan for the planet tonight at camp, but just having that actionable, tangible plan. Like there is a reason that architects and urbanists have developed the method of master plans, a mixture of vision and diagrams and drawings. And one important thing in a master plan is that you have an area table that assigns area use. And it sums up, and you see that the amount of square meters you have is not more or less than the area you have, right? So to have that, for instance, for Earth, and then another important one is the budget, like the investment and the return on investment, and then a last thing you always have in a master plan is that you have phasing. There's a phased way to get from where we are today to the vision we have for 2050. And because no one has ever made a master plan for planet Earth, we've never applied that methodology, but it actually is different from scientific reports or political speeches. It's another thing. And we thought maybe it could be useful. And I think it is.
And do you think it will actually be used?
I mean, right now we're sort of struggling a little bit, like what to do with it. So I'll show some of it tonight, right? But we ended up actually making some very interesting collaborations. We're helping mask the.
Well, you can at least implement it in your own work.
Exactly,
and inspire others.
We started aligning all the work we do as much as we can with the principles of the Plan for the Planet.
Yeah. You said in one of your interviews, we are still chasing a kind of mythological idea of a perfectly conceived and realized building. So that is on the bucket list as well? Or how can this even be achieved?
No, and it's also a good question. And I think, just interestingly, I just came, last week I was in Switzerland, and when I was there, I also just went to visit this little museum we did, the Museum of Watchmaking. We did it for Audemars Piguet.
Yeah.
And imagine the Swiss are famous for their, quality of anything, but also construction quality. And in this particular case, our client are watchmakers, and it's a kind of brass spiral roof that hovers over curved glass. So there are no columns, no walls. The glass is carrying the roof like this, because glass is actually very strong. It's stronger than steel at taking compression, right? So and it was I went with two of my colleagues, and I think that building, it's a very small building. It's 1,000 square meters, but I think it's coming very close to a perfectly built building. And I think, of course, the goal is to, and we have until 2032.
Yeah.
With Vltavskou Philharmonic, but I think Czech has great construction people and has a lot of high quality craft.
Yeah.
And I would definitely want to see the Vltavskou Philharmonic. If that could be the moment where we come as close to the perfectly built building as we'll ever be, I'll be grateful.
Well, let's hope. Thank you for the interview.
Thank you
for your time.
A pleasure.